So thank you all of you for joining us today. And I would like to start our panel discussion with one of the questions that's been in my mind for several but for quite a long now. We see a lot of publications related to crowdsourcing results. We see different rankings on different countries. Now, for example, with the COVID-19 pandemic, we see like publications telling us how the different operators behaved or performed during these months. And what we don't see is what is behind those results. So there's a methodology and how to produce these rankings. And these sometimes can get confusing because we see from some vendors some results, and then we see another study with different results. And so I would like to get your opinion first, Irina, because you have a lot of experience on this. And for example, the ITUT recommendation that you mentioned, E.840, it's been here since 2018, if I remember correctly. So there's a standardized way to produce the ranking, but we continue to see these different methodologies, these different results. So I would like to ask your view or your take on this, and how should we proceed to make all these studies and to publish the results?
So unfortunately, I don't have a solution for the fact that every single agency does in a specific way. So it's kind of, unless you require to have some specification that they need to obey to. The reason you see the differences is that you can't obtain the same performance and better to say, you can't really have an accurate scoring and ranking unless you make sure you compare apple to apple. So obviously when you are, or at least to present the results versus a baseline, a reference. So you define the reference and then your result, when you report the results. It's very important that this, all these agencies that are reporting these measurements, they need to have kind of, first of all, the description, what has been done, how the data has been processed, and then present the results. I'm not saying that one agency is wrong and the other one is true. No, it depends very much the test conditions, the goal of the test, the details regarding the test setup. So if you ask me, if you as a regulator are wondering, okay, whom should I believe? You just need to ask what were the conditions and what did you apply for your analysis in order to come up with these results. The other thing is that you may require them to follow, to a certain extent at least, how it is described in E840. So you have to have this statistical significance on the measurements performed within a specific area. So unless the test is not fully described and the conditions are not fully described, then basically you cannot compare one report versus another. It's exactly like comparing MOS scoring with, I don't know, PNATS version PNATS 2 with scoring from PNATS version 3. So you know what I mean. You can't compare unless you have the same baseline. You have to require the same baseline.
Yes, Irina, thank you very much. And of course, I would like also to have the opinion on this on our industry members. So I think Tom Luke from Tutela, please, do you have an opinion on this?
I do, thank you. And thank you for inviting me to this seminar. So we fully agree. So what we think is actually really important is transparency in terms of the methodology used to determine the results. So You know, my company, Tutela, we produce regular benchmark reports for many countries around the world. But we've defined a methodology that we use to produce those results. And for example, one of the things that we've done is when we compare the experience of operators, we compare in the same locations where all operators have got coverage. Now, of course, in countries such as Mexico, you know, operators such as Telcel may have much more coverage in much bigger areas. But when you're comparing, you know, we believe it's important to compare apples for apples. There's no point in comparing the nationwide coverage of one operator to the coverage of an operator they only cover, you know, 2 or 3 cities, because it's unfair towards the operator with more coverage, because they'll have, you know, lower frequency bands probably covering, you know, the rural areas. So just to give you one example, in our methodology, we define these things called common coverage areas. And these are the areas that all of the operators have coverage. And for the purposes of benchmarking, we only compare operators in those areas. But really, we think the important thing is, you know, everybody measures things differently. I don't think there's any one correct way of doing it. There's just different ways of looking at the problem or looking at experience. We think, in our opinion, is the most important thing to do is to be transparent about what the results show, so people can decide and understand what they mean.
Thank you very much, Tom. I think this apple-to-apples comparison can be quite challenging sometimes because, as you mentioned, in Mexico, we have a different coverage print for every operator, and we have a huge country. So the conditions vary a lot from one region to another, from the north to the south of Mexico. And so it changes the whole scenario for comparing, and some places, of course, we have coverage from one operator, so there's nothing to compare there, right? So please allow me to go to Ian Fogg from OpenSignal to take your view on this. Ian, please.
Sure. So I think those are all great questions. I think there's also a philosophical question. What is it you're trying to understand about the world? Are you trying to understand the best possible experience that people get on the best possible devices? Or are you trying to understand what people in the main are getting in the real world, what real mobile phone users are experiencing? I think there's also another piece, which is that one single test is not sufficient to understand the experience across a mobile network. You need to have a number of range of different tests, different applications, different kinds of media to really, again, understand the experience. And at OpenSignal, everything we do in our public reporting is designed to understand that real world experience using the full range of handsets and chipsets that consumers have in the real world across all the operators in all the locations that consumers are using mobile services. I think there's a separate piece, which is with clients or regulators who have a deeper access to the analytics data. They can obviously cross-cut that data in different ways to understand different kinds of questions, to say segment just the best possible experience or the worst possible experience to understand the reliability of a service. And I think there's different things that happen here. But what we really focused on is that real world experience using a range of different measures to help gauge what's really happening in the world. I think there's another piece that's striking here is that we're in an industry which is moving very quickly. There's new technologies happening all of the time. So I think there's a distinction between the principles by which you design your testing, which we have published on our website, and the minutiae of how you might measure something brand new like 5G. And I think that's something where the methodology has to change. You've got to innovate because the world is moving on very quickly. And we can see that even just looking at where 5G was last year and comparing with where it is this year with the launch of standalone access and carrier aggregation on 5G. So I think that's our approach, very much real world methodology, looking at a range of measures, both the technical measures and the experiential measures like video experience, games experience, and voice experience, where we use a MOS-based methodology.
Thank you, Ian. You mentioned also, you touched on another subject, which is 5G and new services coming, and that we need to change maybe the methodology, but I would like to touch on that a bit later. Please now let me ask Doug Sorrells from Ookla. So what's the Ookla view on these different methodologies, different results question?
Well, it's a little bit different. For the last 15 years have focused on measuring, capacity and capability of connectivity, and so our infrastructure is spread throughout the world. Our test infrastructure, even in Mexico, we have 200 testing nodes in Mexico. And, that's out of 12,000 plus around the world. And you have to have that kind of infrastructure in order to measure capacity, to actually measure the server that's being delivered by the operators. And so, the way we view the challenge of going forward, I like to, just to touch on the 5G topic a little, fiber and whatnot, measuring multi-gigabit, we're using the same methodology we've used for years, and the evolution is around making sure we can still measure that full capacity. So, being able to measure 5 gigabit, we want to make sure we can actually measure that and use that as the same comparison year over year that we've done, throughout history. And so, this year we've released multi-server connectivity. So whenever you take a test to the speed test infrastructure, you're actually testing to multiple servers of those 200 in Mexico, as an example, to make sure that the servers do not become the bottleneck, no internet link in between the servers and the last mile are the bottleneck either, and that we are actually measuring the quality of service and the capacity that connect. The one thing that a regulator should be able to hold an operator accountable for. Otherwise, if you're measuring to another country, another service, these are all important things to understand and know. But when you're wanting to look at a specific, the thing, there was in the presentation earlier, we talked about, I think that Teo might have even had it, where, you're showing that an operator is delivering gigabit. Yeah, you need to be able to assess, are they actually delivering a gigabit? You can't do that unless you put that kind of measure in place. So it's about what you're measuring as much as how you're measuring and where you're measuring to. Also, let me add one thing, because you made the point about methodologies and whatnot. We openly share our methodology. We openly share our data with any regulator, any operator. They replicate what we do. And so all of our rankings are, you can do it as well. And we open source a large set of our data now these days as well. We released that recently. So if you look at Ookla for Good, and you can see the, global rankings by country, and we'll have a lot more open sourcing of our data coming here very soon.
Yes, thank you very much, Doug. I think, and you mentioned another of the big topics in crowdsourcing, and we talked about this in another webinar in ITU, which is transparency. And this is, as long, and you, Irina, you mentioned as well, as long as you have and you identify the methodology, the procedures, the baseline assumptions, then it's fine, because you can compare and you can evaluate the different results. But otherwise, if we don't start by having transparency, then I think it's quite difficult. And of course, for a regulator, is also important to understand what is being measured and whether to refer to it or not. And so Johan, you are with the regulator, so what's your perspective on this topic?
Very much the expectation of the agency or the regulator themselves, as well as the expectation of the consumers. The regulator themselves must be able to have a good or even a realistic sense of what the consumers are actually expecting. If the consumers actually do not expect really high throughput, then probably you don't really need to measure all this. But in a highly connected country like Singapore, connectivity, and of course, it's also because of the people in Singapore, they are more IT savvy. they typically keep a very close watch to all these news. And when they have close watch to all these news, then there'll be a problem to the regulator, because they'll start to compare. And probably they'll compare in a very wrong way, because they may be running speed tests to maybe the US, and then they had very slow speeds, and then they'll start complaining why the operators are not doing what they claim to be doing. And of course, I think when comparing, even as an agency ourselves, we do a lot of comparison, but the main thing is that the users of the different reports actually need to first understand how all of them measure differently. And of course, this of course leads to the question of transparency on how transparent is transparent, whether by giving a short description on the website to say how these tests are being measured is transparent enough when doing the different comparison. And of course, I think just now I also mentioned the part on the sustainability. There is definitely, with 5G, there's actually definitely going to be a sustainability issue, especially when the consumers are performing measurements through the crowdsourcing, unless the operators is willing to actually zero rate the data. If not, I don't think any users will actually perform measurements using 5G if the amount of data that they have is less than 10 gigabytes in a month. And of course, I applaud Ookla in their recent initiative on the Ookla for Good, the open source data in the Amazon S3. Yeah, so I think all this when coming into play, it will allow the operators, the regulator, to actually have a very good sense of the surrounding. Of course, as a regulator ourselves, we don't just actually serve the need of the user, but actually we also need to look at the global landscape as well, to make sure that we are competitive enough to be what we claim to have.
Thank you very much, Johan. I think the challenges that we have as regulators are different. Of course, you have users complaining, as you mentioned during your presentation. Even if the network performance from the operator's perspective is all well and is no alarms, no bad KPIs, the users will always feel, for example, because it's not homogeneous, the coverage. So there will be places where there's no good coverage, and users will be complaining. And so then you also have to, there's this trade-off between the QoS, QoE, and how to find a way to measure them, to evaluate those two perspectives, and how to present the results to the users as well. Because users, in the end, they are not engineers, they are not technical people. So you also have to find a way to transform the data and the results to be, in order for them to be useful for the end users, right? And so I also have a couple of questions from our two first presentations, but before going to that, and I changed a little bit the order of the panel. We asked our industry vendors to prepare a couple of slides with the results, and also to present some results from Mexico as well. So I would give now the floor to, let's go in the opposite order. So now, Ookla, Doug, you have the floor, please.
Sure. Let me share here real quick. And forgive me, I'm in a storm right now, and my internet went down, so I'm tethered to my phone doing this. So I hope it works okay. Let's see here. All right. Do you see this okay?
Yes, it's okay.
All right. So very quickly, Ookla, our mission is to help make the internet better, faster, more accessible for everyone. I won't go into these details for the sake of time, but I will note you know, we're most known for speed test. All of our data comes from speed test. It's all first party. It's all user opted in. You know, user initiated testing predominantly for all of our performance tests. But, you know, 500 million unique people use it every year. And we've had over 500 million app installs. We also measure just as much fixed broadband as we do mobile. You know, we started out in fixed broadband and, you know, shifted to smartphones when that came about. And, you know, we even confirmed back in 2013 that Tony Stark is a user as well. So, you know, I mentioned we have over 12,000 servers around the world. It's about 12,500 right now. These are all active. These are all running. Most of these are gigabit. Most of these are multi-gigabit, you know, at internet transit centers, ISPs, ASPs. This is very key to allowing us to do what we do. You know, measuring to a CDN somewhere isn't going to do this. You're going to cross, they don't have the geographic presence that's necessary to truly measure capacity in every country around the world. You know, and we are basically in every single country. I think the number is 215, but that's including countries that may not be formally defined as countries. So we use this 190 plus, but basically we have infrastructure everywhere. And then, as I mentioned before, over 200 of these in Mexico. You know, just to give a view that you have to have presence everywhere to measure capacity. That's just a fact, and that's our bread and butter is what we do. You know, this powers various tools of ours. You know, we have all of our performance data found in speed test intelligence. We also have Cell Analytics, which is our, you know, RF focused platform where we recently rolled out 3-dimensional views. So we now have 15-meter vertical layering of all of our, you know, coverage data sets that we then cross intersect with, you know, building data. So you can see, you know, RF footprint or user density in, you know, any metro area around the world. And then lastly, as I mentioned, we launched Ookla for Good this year. We've been doing a lot of this on the side, but we made it a formal thing at the start of the year. And these are just some of the partnerships that we have through this program. Started open sourcing data. We're going to do far more of this. This is a big initiative for us. And, you know, if you have any interest, you know, go to search for Ookla for Good. You'll find it, and you can send an inquiry, get in touch, and we're happy to participate. And that is what I have for presentation. I actually did not get the message that you wanted some Mexico-related statistics, so I will I will stop there.
It's okay. Thank you very much. So now we go to Ian Fogg from OpenSignal. Please, you have the floor.
Sure. Let me just get the sharing working. Give me a second. You guys see my screen okay?
Yep.
Cool.
Yes.
So OpenSignal has been founded about 10 years. We started out looking at mobile network experience. We've recently started looking at fixed experience too. I've got a short deck here. Follow me on Twitter if you want to see more things. We have a lot published on our website as well. As I said before, our focus is very much on understanding the real world experience of users. And everything we do, from the sample we use, the way we approach testing, is all about understanding that real world experience. So we range across the wide range of handset types, wide range of chipsets, locations, times of day, and the rest. 2020 has been a kind of a tricky year, should we say, for everyone, I think. And during the year, we published a few things looking at how the mobile experience has changed in different countries. And we've had operators and regulators come to us and say, we've seen that happening in that country, tell us more about it. We've seen many networks be very resilient, but we've also seen changes where in some countries, speeds and video experience has fallen. So we published a whole load of that earlier in the year, haven't got that in the deck. What I have got is some brand new or some very recent data looking at how experience and data consumption has changed during the year. Now, a number of operators have said they've seen changes in data consumption, and we can see that looking at our analytics. what's striking about this is that raw data alone doesn't really tell you what's happening. You have to analyze it and look at what the trends are. And because of all the changes in 2020, we've almost got a laboratory experiment in if you do this, what happens to the network experience? Here we've taken 9 markets, including Mexico, and we've categorized them into 3 groups. Those where we've seen overall data consumption increase, the top 3 examples here, India, Italy, and Malaysia. And in each of those, we've seen speeds fall. Why is that? Well, higher data usage puts more load on the network. And in most markets, the carriers haven't been able to add new wireless spectrum. So there's a supply constraint. In the second group, we've seen data consumption fall and speeds go up. And that's what we've seen in Mexico, Brazil, and Argentina. Then in a third set of markets, we've seen overall data consumption about the same, overall speeds broadly flat. And there are 3 examples there. In the piece published on our website, you'll see that what's interesting is when you go to the next level down in the analysis and you look at what different groups of users are doing, because the overall data consumption doesn't really tell you what's happening. Often what we're seeing is a subset of users with much higher data consumption and the majority of users with less data consumption as they spend more time at home, more time on Wi-Fi. And you'll see that particularly in Italy. So have a look at the piece on the website because it goes in a bit more deeply than we've got in this piece. We also have recently published our report into the Mexico mobile network experience, and we've compared the carriers, the operators in Mexico. What I pick up from this is, firstly, you can see if you measure different parts of the mobile experience, you can see different trends happening. You know, when we look at our MOS-based, our mean opinion score-based methodologies for video experience, where we stream video to consumer devices and measure the technical characteristics, then convert that to a mean opinion score, an experience measure, we can see the difference between the carriers, the difference between the experience in each carrier is very narrow. Similarly with our games experience measure, which looks at multiplayer gaming, again, MOS-based, on our voice app experience. If you look on the other hand at just speed, you can see the experience of Telcel users is way ahead in terms of the download speed of Movistar and AT&T, and similarly on upload speed. And I think this highlights why, even at these very top line measures, why it's important to use different measures to look at the mobile network experience. And there's loads of sub-metrics and analytics that clients and regulators that have full access to our data can look at and to analyze this further. I mentioned right at the start 5G. We're obviously publishing analysis of how 5G experience varies around the world. And although there's quite a lot of, I think, negativity in the US at the moment, but globally, it's about 5 to 6 times faster, we find. We look at the real world experience, the average 5G download speed, and compare that with the average 4G download speed. What's striking about this is that we're really right at the start of the 5G era. Virtually every carrier's got non-standalone access live. Virtually every carrier's got one 5G frequency band live. Where we'll be in a year or two's time is they'll have a low band 5G service, a mid band 5G service, and a millimeter wave service live. And the whole experience will transform. There'll be more time spent on 5G, average speeds and peak speeds will go up. This, remember, is just this very early snapshot at the start of the 5G era. But already we can see a much faster experience on 5G than on 4G. Video experience piece a bit different because that depends a bit on how carriers and operators manage video traffic on their network, but we have that just not in this slide deck. How do we collect this information? So we have a vast sample of real smartphone users in virtually every country in the world, collecting data. We use both manual initiated testing, but also automated testing at random times and location, which we think is very important to provide a balanced, real sample of what's really happening in the world. So we use both automated testing and user-initiated testing. We also collect passive signal measures and other things as well. We do active tests for things like speed and latency, but also we do an active test for video experience as well, separately from download speed, which means if an operator is throttling video traffic, we will spot it. We combine that together with analytics. This is actually a very hard thing to do. I think Doug mentioned Ookla's been running 16 years, we've been running 10. You know, this is something that's really hard to do, to pull this vast amount of data together, to make sure all the software on the smartphones is working with all the latest versions of Android and iOS. So we test on both Android and iOS. It's a really hard problem. And because we operate globally, our R&D costs are amortized or spread across our clients globally. We think that's an incredibly important thing. Where we've seen companies try and do it at smaller scale, or organizations, they often don't realize how hard it is both to pull the data together and do the analytics on it to derive insights into what's happening in the market. One of the key things we think is important when we have a standard methodology is being able to make comparisons between each operator to give them that competitive analysis. Most operators will have network probes, they will have their own drive testing. That will give them a very deep understanding of their own network. What we can do with a standard methodology is enable comparisons across networks. For a regulator, it also means when a regulator looks at OpenSignal reports, you can tell how countries compare because we have the same methodology in each country. We talked a lot, I think, at the start of the session around independence and transparency. So we have published manifestos into the principles at which we operate under around independence, around privacy, around how we design our analytics, and how we measure real-world experience. And those are all published on our website. And there's obviously deeper methodology information available beyond that. And there's a hell of a lot actually on those 3 pages if you go to our website. There's deeper information obviously available for clients of OpenSignal as well. So let me take a stop there, and hopefully that's given you a taste of some Mexican trends, as well as some global trends, and a sense of what OpenSignal has achieved after 10 years of developing analytics and building real-world measures of mobile network experience.
Thank you very much, Ian. And well, lastly, we have Tom Luke from Tutela. You have the floor, Tom.
Thank you. Let me just start sharing my screen. Can you see that okay?
Yes, it's okay.
Perfect, thank you. Tutela, as the other parties, we're also a crowdsourced data company, and we're collecting mobile experience data globally on a 24/7 basis. So we have our software, our methodology is to embed our STK, our software, into the background of third-party applications. So these are applications like, could be games or weather apps or dating apps or taxi apps. It doesn't really matter to us. We have a broad portfolio of more than 1,000 diverse applications that we work with. We pay them to put our software into their apps, and they collect data for us with the consent of the user. Each time we need the user to consent to give the data to us. But this enables us to collect data from a very wide range of users across a huge range of demographics with minimal bias. And we're collecting more than 200 billion measurements every day as a result of that approach. So one about our particular methodology is, we're measuring end-to-end experience, real-world end-to-end experience. This is what we're measuring, and that is the performance from the handset through the network, through to CDN providers. Some of them you can see here. We've actually got more than 2,000 different nodes globally that we test against, but we're testing, kind of dissimilar to the Ookla methodology. We're measuring to the application providers or CDNs and measuring the end-to-end performance. And the reason why we do that is what we're trying to measure is the performance that a user might get using an application such as Netflix or Spotify or Gmail, which are of course hosted on these platforms. So we use the same infrastructure for our testing. So with the data, we collect this data, we produce analysis based on that data, which of course includes a significant amount of data normalization, data cleaning, etc. And these are some of the things that are possible. So benchmarking, and as you'll see on our website as well, we have a number of reports. We release one report every quarter for Mexico. So you'll see those results. We have another one coming out, I think, in a few weeks with a new report for Mexico. We also measure video performance, so we can play videos in the background of the handset, so we can see how it's performing. And then we can also do more advanced things, such as looking at in-building performance versus outside performance, to capture the full user experience and separate those by those different environments. Just in the case of Mexico, so we're collecting around just over 1 billion records each month from around 1.4 million users, and this allows us to take a view of the whole country, or just a city, or just zoom into just part of one city, and we can do this on every day or every week to look at how the network is performing. So here's another example. So this is just a high-level map showing the throughput performance across Mexico City. So you can see there's some sort of red areas down there where we're seeing performance of below 10 megabits per second on average in those pixels. As we saw sort of during March, we saw some interesting performance changes during periods of lockdown, etc. We saw network performance drop across all operators during March, which we've seen a recovery of since. One of the other things that we, operators tell us they find, particularly useful is, we're collecting data 24/7 in the background. So we're running download tests at random times on the handsets, and that enables us to perform use cases such as comparing peak versus off-peak performance. So the charts you can see on the bottom right is showing performance for 3 operators in Mexico by time of day, and that's in the Mexico City area. And what you'll actually notice is that during the off-peak times, we're seeing 4 a.m., 5 a.m. when the networks are unloaded, we're seeing really good performance on the networks. But as we get into the busier periods, on 2 out of the 3 networks, we see a big drop in performance. And what this tells us is that some networks and in some locations, they need more capacity, and at certain times of day, users are getting a poor experience. Even though on average across the course of the day, it might be pretty good, there's certain times of the day getting a poor experience. In addition to running things like throughput tests, as I mentioned, we run video testing. So that allows us to analyze things such as YouTube, Facebook, and Netflix video performance in terms of individual KPIs such as stall rates, etc., but also in terms of an overall video quality score. So we can see the performance that users will be getting on those different platforms. And then we have more advanced use cases. I don't have time to go through many of these, but just a couple of examples. So we've built a machine learning-based algorithm that classifies the data into indoors and outdoors. What you can see on the map here is showing red is outdoors, blue is indoors. Obviously, red predominantly roads. And this allows us to compare the performance between operators. So, I mean, it's interesting and can be useful to operators to optimize performance for indoor or outdoor performance. And in fact, we've seen cases where overall an operator might be the best, but when it comes to indoor performance, they might be the worst. Not in this example, but the data enables us to find those cases and help operators to improve their networks. Just a couple of highlights. I won't go through sort of this in too much detail, but back in the background of 1,000 applications, we're doing automatic background testing 24/7. We don't need to wait for a user to sort of manually start a test. We're collecting the data passively. As a matter of fact, users can't manually start a test to avoid potential skewing or bias within the data. I mentioned it's end-to-end testing, so this really measures the whole journey that the user would see in terms of traffic. We're fully committed to privacy, so we're fully compliant with things like GDPR, CCPA. In fact, we go even beyond those things in the countries that we operate in, and we don't collect any sensitive personal data. We also rotate IDs of devices to prevent anybody from potentially following users, just to make sure we're always protecting our users. And really, we're trying to measure the application experience that users are getting. Gracias. Thank you very much. We have on our website, just in case you're interested, more analysis for Mexico. There's a report here for, actually, it's a few months old now. We have another one coming very soon. But this measures things like throughput speeds, latencies, but also our own metric, what we call consistent quality. And this is the percentage of the time that a user would have a good enough network performance to do things like watch high definition video, have a group video conference meeting, play games, etc. This is the percentage of the time that the network is good enough to deliver that experience. So it's like a balanced score, looking at a range of KPIs that we have as well. That's all I have for you, but very happy to take any more questions, or yeah, please take a look at our website for more analysis.
Thank you very much, Tom. So with this, I would like to take a question that we received in the chat. And I think this is addressed to our three vendors. So it says, not having an apple-to-apple comparison is at the same time a great opportunity to create customized measurement campaigns by purpose, region, time, type of service, etc. Are the crowdsourcing providers considering the possibility to offer customized measurement campaigns for regulators, purposes, operators, etc.? And I think this also is touching on a topic that Irina mentioned during her presentation. When you have these a priori measurement campaigns that you can in fact plan in advance and design this representativity of the data, you have a different methodology. So are the crowdsourcing providers willing to adapt or to customize these measurement campaigns? I think we can start with Ian this time.
Sure. So I think there's two things there. As I said, there's the ingredients, there's the measurements you make in the market, of which we make billions of measurements, all kinds of measurements around video, around games, around download, latency, signal, and the rest. And I think when you look at our website, what we publish is just the top line metrics, the high level metrics, which have that standard methodology. Clients of OpenSignal get access to much deeper submetrics and can slice and dice those to look at different hypotheses about what's happening in the market. And if you look, I mean, things like the data consumption I showed with the trends there, that's my team doing exactly that kind of slicing and dicing with measurements that we capture.
Okay, thank you, Ian. What about Ookla? Doug, please.
It's a similar answer, to be honest. We all have such large volumes of data that if it's a subset of a focused area, I mean, that can be looked at just by distilling the data down. If we're talking about custom testing, like a unique test that doesn't currently exist within our platforms, that's a little bit more complicated. We have large install bases, and we support this, with operators and regulators by licensing or providing our technology to them. We have drive test companies use our technology. We have operators that have our code embedded in their apps, and they can do custom versions of it then. But our core of what we do, our data is vast, and it's all about slicing and dicing that and looking at it in various ways.
Thank you, Doug. And Tom, please go ahead.
This is a simple one for us. The short answer is no. We don't allow operators to make customized analysis of our data. What we do allow is operators to take on methodology and look at maybe a smaller area, for example, Mexico City instead of the whole of Mexico, and look at analysis of or make claims in the media about them being the best network in Mexico City. We would insist that that's based on our methodology. We can't let them cherry pick and select the results they want to make up that analysis. That would be too biased. So we don't allow that. So that's when it comes to what we'd allow an operator to do in terms of what they could say publicly with our data. We wouldn't allow them to go away from our methodology and cherry pick for themselves. We do allow any operator, any client of ours, and actually on a free of charge basis, regulators can have access to our data as well. They can analyze anything they like. You can look at different operator performance at different times of day, different locations, in buildings, on roads, and railways. That's up to you, but you just can't start putting things on social media to say that you're the best without following our guidelines.
I just come back to that. I mean, that was exactly the point I was trying to get to. Is our top line measurements are our top line measurements. But for internal use, if regulators or operators want to slice and dice the data, lots and lots and lots of ways of doing that.
Thank you, Ian and Tom. And this actually brings me to Yo-Hong, because as regulators, I think, for example, we issue a methodology for doing measurements and for having measurement campaigns, because we are sometimes interested in having a specific test scenario to compare the different operators and to present them with the results. And since we also have being the regulator, you have to have an open methodology and to have it published. So, and I also noticed in your presentation, you talked about this I Am Connected initiative, and I understand that you planned for your own solution. You have this app that I am guessing it was developed in-house. So what's your take on this as a regulator? Is it important to have a customized methodology? And also, for example, when you have your own solution and your own app, for example, as you showed, how do you interest, or how do you gain users? How do you publish it to get the sufficient measurement samples?
Yeah, I think that is a very good question. So while actually IMDA designed the way we want things to be done, the app is not done by us. It's not developed by us. We get a vendor to do it for us. It's simply not possible for a regulator to actually perform this development role. But so as you mentioned very correctly, we design our own methodology. Simply because we have experienced the active methodology before. So in Singapore, in the past, we used to have the National Internet Measurement Infrastructure, the NIMI, which is used to measure the fixed broadband. And we have ceased fixed broadband measurements since, I think, three years ago, I think. And purely because we think that if measurements are performed by the regulator ourselves is simply not sustainable, even though our fixed broadband in Singapore is unlimited. There's no data cap to the consumers. But because we need to maintain the infrastructure, is simply impossible, and it's too expensive to own this infrastructure. And that's why we also we understand that in the future, network will just become faster and faster. By owning your own infrastructure, actually, it's just simply not sustainable. That's why we embark on the passive measurements, where we want to understand the user's actual experience on the ground from their typical usage, regardless whether what type of handsets they are using. So basically, the experience on the ground will just consolidate all the different behaviors of the user. It could be a very slow handset. It could be a very fast handset. It just reflects exactly what is on the ground. Whether a particular operator actually provides a very cheap and good handset, or do they actually provide a very lousy handset, even with very cheap plans and things like that. So with that, then we will be able to tell how, with all the results being published, the methodology being informed to all the operators, they'll definitely be on their toes. They will start to introduce better handsets. They will start to upgrade their networks to make sure that the operators, the consumers on the ground, they are getting something better than what they have now, to actually have better results. Yep. And we believe that, I think, moving forward, some of these measurements will be something very relevant, because we feel that while while we want to know the peak throughput, it's too expensive to know the peak throughput. And by knowing the peak throughput does not necessarily mean that the users on the ground are having very good experience. Yeah, that's my take on this.
Thank you, Johan. Yes, quality of experience is definitely another topic, and it has to be addressed in another way. And I like very much your vision on how to measure now 5G if we are talking about gigabits per second. And if we are thinking about active tests, for example, nowadays, sometimes we rely on the data consumption on the user's phone, and they are paying for this. So it's unimaginable how to measure gigabit per second network using or relying on the data plans of the end users. And with this, I would like to ask Irina, because you also mentioned about the 5G and how to measure, and you are of course talking about also ML techniques. So what's your view on, should we change the methodology to measure now 5G networks? And I have a second question for you on the same topic. I would like you to ask, and please allow me to put it this way, is drive test dead for 5G and go on?
Okay.
Please.
Okay, and related to that, it was a question, I replied to the question because it was a question regarding on the chat. It was a question regarding also, because we mentioned the use cases. If massive crowdsourced data will really support the optimization and planning. So the reality, I would say, and that's why I had that slide trying to explain this overlap of the data and what you get from each of these data sources. And obviously to apply for different use cases to certain levels. But definitely crowdsourced data will reflect the user experience. And now, you have a lot of data, and we discussed about, I mentioned the statistical space and time representativeness, and to understand all, and to appreciate all the crowdsourced data companies are doing when applying this analysis. What I would like to mention is that indefinitely having such a lot of data, with machine learning, you had the advantage to be able to advance machine learning. I mean, deep learning, so unsupervised machine learning. You are be able to detect some anomalies in your database, to predict actually anomalies happening in your database. Then you can actually remove those and make better assumptions and better evaluations on the user experience. Now, that's one point. The second point, you mentioned the methodologies. Yes, you will change the methodologies, and the question that you are going to make sure that you can measure the capacities. So literally, if you are at the device level, as crowdsourced data is, you can't really infer, you can just infer about the capacity, network capacity. Network capacity, you are going always to find out the exact from OSS data, right? You are not performing drive test data or even crowdsourced data in order to determine the capacity of the network. So what you will be able to determine is actually the perceived link throughput or capacity for the, and even you can actually infer of the maximum capacity that particular link, that particular user can obtain. And actually it's a work going on in the ITU. It's about GN cap. That refers exactly to this, how we can infer on capacity. Regarding regarding methodologies, another thing that will happen when it's about 5G is the fact that we define differently the QoE. I heard, I think it was OpenSignal, I think, Jan, I mean, you mentioned the video testing. Okay, you apply some techniques for measuring the MOS for the video testing. I'm not sure what technique you are applying, but, and I mentioned also it's possible to apply some models, but would that be the only, especially when you talk about gaming, would that be the only dimension that we will be interested in when it's about the 5G services? 5G is about interactivity. It's about gaming, it's about virtual reality, augmented reality. These are coming with another dimension, interactivity measurements. So this I have to set up differently, and I have to look at the data differently when I start to measure this kind of application. So definitely methodologies change. Methodologies because your services are changing. Looking at the data, you are interpreting them differently, and because you have a lot of data, you start to apply advanced machine learning to solve this. But there are problems that you cannot 100% solve as massive optimization and planning. This won't be possible. Ever. You will never ever have an operator or infrastructure vendor accepting that based on, they are looking, all of them. And I know for sure, for example, Nokia that opened a kind of a workshop on this topic, how you actually using machine crowdsourcing data, how can you speculate as much as possible in order to perform, to do troubleshooting and optimization. But it always has its limitations. And now you ask me if drive testing is dead. Drive testing, I personally believe, okay, you may say I have a biased opinion, but drive testing can, it needs to be, actually it is going to be completely resolved. It requires a lot of rethinking. It's about not only automation, but actually being predictive. You can actually start to do measurements that are predicted. You already can predict based on the measurements that are doing what will happen, at least in seconds. And there are application-based, like the connected car use case, or it might not be necessarily in the EMBMM case. So that needs a lot of transformation to adapt this. Why can't you get rid of the drive testing? Because it's the only way in which you can detect at detailed level why in the world did the device behave in a specific way. You are scratching your head, you bring in all the QoE information, all the charts that you get from the crowdsourcing. Oh, but why in the world did it happen? And even if you use other sources, unless you are a device reacts based on its own history, and you cannot understand why this is happening. And especially that testing will take a long time still to exist, even if, okay, I will tell you when maybe we'll die. But anyhow, until that moment, it's the fact that we are in a continuous transformation. We are launching these cases, these new cases. We are talking about another 10 years when all the 5G use cases that we talk, the verticals that we are talking about is different, are going to be in place. And until that time, you will still need the device behavior to understand. Now, how it can be compensated? It will be compensated with extensive MDT, minimizing drive testing, with extensive communication, gathering information from the network and the device, and get this information. But that requires a lot of syncing, and because you deal a lot of data that will load your artificially, maybe your network. So a lot of syncing is there. And last but not least, okay, you are going to say it will die because actually 5G is machine learning based. The work indeed just started. So basically device and network are self-aware of each other. So they will know how to react based on machine learning mechanisms. You have the focus group in ITU, which is taken by study group 12 on developing this kind of platforms that will allow this machine learning. But we are still, it's kind of talking about an autopilot on a plane, but not in year 2020, like it's the technology for airplanes. We are still back in 1900 when it's about the 5G networks. But the whole concept will change definitely, and it's a learning process. Sorry.
So,
thank you very much, Irina. Yes, Ian, you wanted to say something.
Yeah, so I think years ago, people thought about the debate about, real world crowd measurements and drive tests as one of a cost discussion. And I don't think it is. I think it's a discussion about what kind of sources of data is useful to a business. And the challenge with drive testing is you typically get episodic data points every 6 months or every year, depending on how much budget you can throw at it, for a few locations, and you've then got to derive what does that mean. In 2020, we've seen that many organizations have not been able to drive test because of, 2020, everything we know about, where at OpenSignal, we've been pulling data in from real world users all of the time with an ongoing feed of data from all the locations, and we can see what's happening in the market. So I think it's very much not about cost, it's about what is it you want to achieve. And actually, when you start getting into billions of measurements, this isn't really a cheap thing, right? This is a complex, expensive thing to do too. It's not cheap, it's about ongoing flow of data, about all the frequency bands, all the devices, all the users, all the locations, 24/7 that you can then derive analysis from. Where drive testing gives you brief episodic data points, usually from public locations, not necessarily from where people are at the time. When you think about 5G, there are other challenges. If you walk test or drive test, how do you do that with millimeter wave, which is a type of frequency which probably the glass of the window of the car will block? You know, there's some real challenges around it when you start thinking about where the technology is going as well. So I think it's really about the type of data and analysis you want to draw that defines whether you use real world measurements or drive testing. I think they're complementary, but I think it's very much about something where ongoing feed of real world measurements gives you something you can't actually get from drive testing.
I actually have one of the thought on this is that, yeah, I believe that drive testing will come back. Like, I think it's in a lull. I think it's going to be necessary, you know, in the coming years. You know, we're all relying on crowdsourced data that's going to go away. You know, as you know, Google policy changes in the next year, as Android becomes more like iOS, you know, there's going to be a lot of data disappearing. So there's not going to be the volume of crowd data needed to do what we do today. So I think they'll remain complementary. You know, I do think that, you know, crowd will exist in a smaller volume, but it's just the reality of what Google has to do and the way that it's not just privacy law, it's the fact that, you know, restrictions technically on the OS, you know, Android 11 is so much harder to even get the permissions needed to collect data from the consumer in the background or sell information, anything like that. I think that, we're probably a year away from really feeling that, but that's going to enable drive testing again, is how I see it.
I would tend to agree with some of what Doug has said there. I mean, we see them as, at least on the Tutela side, we see them as very complementary sources of data. They tell you different things, and there are things that you can do with crowdsourcing that you could never do with drive testing. You can't drive test through people's houses in the middle of the night. You can't drive test everywhere 24/7. Of course, you can't do those things. So you can't monitor the network in the same way. But on the other side, you know, when you think about things like 5G network slicing, you know, where operators will offer a certain network slice depending on the subscription model, it's going to be a little hard to measure that from a crowdsource perspective. We're still yet to understand how that will work. Whereas, of course, with drive testing, you can actually measure network slicing or different network slices depending on how the network has deployed it. So network slicing will be a case. You know, voice calls is something that we've always struggled to measure with crowdsourcing that drive testing can do. But also things like, you know, activating a cell tower. You know, this is not a benchmarking exercise, but you activate a new cell tower. An operator first, they need to test that before they fully activate it and give the access to the public. Now, of course, if they haven't actually activated it, then crowdsourcing can't see it. It's invisible at that point. So you'll need field testing at that point to measure the tower to make sure that it's been activated correctly. And I guess also when you think about things like network densification, so we're seeing cases like I'm sure in central Mexico City, where there's many small cells being rolled out and deployed. The coverage of those small cells is really small and can change, and you know, it can be difficult to get you know, all of the measurements you might want to take from those individual small cells through either crowdsourcing or drive testing. So maybe there's a combination that could work, but we personally don't think that, or at least I personally don't think that one is going to disappear and the other one is going to win. Really, they're complementary.
I'm kind of intrigued by those comments. I think I'm a bit more optimistic about the world than my peers at Ookla and Tutela. I think 2020's got to them. I mean, we collect data from our own apps and our SDK partners. We do automated testing. But what's interesting is everyone's worried about what's happening on Android, but we're collecting data quite happily from iPhone users today, and there is no platform more locked down than iPhone, including Android 11. So I think that there is a very viable market for real-world analytics into the future.
So,
thank you, Ian.
Yes, if I may to summarize, because I agree with everybody, including you, Ian. So definitely. So it's kind of, you cannot kill or forget about drive testing, at least for a while, until, as I said, the networks with the very smart devices, just because you have scenarios that Tom just mentioned when you launch different networks. I understand about the point of a millimeter wave. You cannot drive millimeter waves, right? It's a hotspot, basically. But what it is the need that of the drive test tools to change the concept. It's about the remote control of them and able to not, I just drive and I walk. This is not possible. So kind of changes the same content. Because with the crowdsourced data, especially in these phases and use cases that were mentioned, like optimization and troubleshooting, I understand you have a lot of data. The richness, the depth of the data will allow you to understand the real world of the user. But what if I am the infrastructure vendor? What if I'm the operator? Okay, because they are paying me, right? But I have to fix the network. And I am, the sporadic thing is that exactly what I want to do. I want to make sure that I am sampling the right places at the right moment. I have all the OSS information. I just then drive in a precise way, or better to say cost-efficient way. But I don't think that crowdsourced data will go away completely, and I don't think, so they coexist and they complement each other. This is what I would say, Tania.
Thank you, Irina.
Piece of the day.
Yes, of course. I think what I take from this discussion is, it's depending on the use case, actually. We have to understand what we're looking for and what we are intending to measure, to evaluate, and then choose the right tools, the right methodology. And of course, we have, as I mentioned before, the issue about transparency, to understand the results, to share the results, and to publish them also, because in the end, the end users are taking this information to take decisions. So this is I think it's very important to try to communicate and to be as transparent as possible. And I liked very much your answers, all of you, because I also, like Irina said, I agree with everybody. And it very well rounded up to our first question about methodologies and how different methodologies give different results. And now we came back to use cases as well. And like I said before, I think the secret relies in choosing the right tools, the right methodologies for each use case. So I think we are already 15 minutes past the time for the panel. So I would just like to thank everyone for your useful and very insightful presentations, and for a very nice discussion as well. And I will give back the floor now to Miguel. And I also thank you for the invitation to moderate the panel. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Really appreciate it. Thank you.
Yes, thank you.
Well, we have reached the end of this great webinar. And I would like to sincerely thank to our speakers, Irina Kotanis and Joe Hong, to our panelists, Ian Fogg, Tom Luke, and Doug Sottles, and of course, to our moderator, Tania Villa. Thank you all for accepting the invitation of the IPN to participate in this seminar. This has been a great seminar that has allowed us to know the perspective of evaluating telecommunication networks using crowdsourcing. Although there are many possibilities, there are also many challenges to be addressed. So much more work is expected in this area in the following years. In fact, I want to point out most of our audience are undergraduate and graduate students in the telecom area or in some related areas. And without a doubt, several of them will be working on these topics in the following years. Due to time constraints, some questions could not be answered, but I ask the audience to leave these questions in the YouTube chat box, and they will be answered later. And we also thank the audience for joining the seminar, students, academics, and the general audience. We invite you to follow the activities of our chair on our social networks. So have a great day and see you soon.
Thank you so much. Appreciate it. Bye now.
Bye.
Thank you. Have a good one.
Thank you, everyone.